When I saw her standing there, smiling at him, I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. My best friend, my husband, together. And then she whispered, almost pleading, "Please, don't tell anyone." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to make the ground swallow me whole. But I didn't. I just stood there, my hands trembling, my throat dry. The smell of rain on the pavement mixed with the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, sweet, familiar, something that had once comforted me, now made my stomach twist with nausea. It had been a Thursday evening. I had come home from work earlier than usual, the sky bruised purple with clouds, the wind pushing through the open windows of our small apartment. I expected to see him in the kitchen, maybe humming as he cooked, the scent of garlic and onions curling through the air. I expected normalcy, but instead, I found betrayal framed in the most casual, ordinary way. Her voice, soft and coaxing, reached me through the hum of the city outside. "Please, don't say anything. I know it's complicated." She looked at me like she was asking for mercy, like I was the one who could ruin her life. And I thought, isn't that always how it goes? The guilty begging the innocent to look away. I remember the rain starting, fat drops pattering against the window, the kind that makes everything smell clean and sharp at the same time. I could hear it tapping against the roof, like a reminder that life doesn't stop, even when your own world is collapsing. I tried to speak, but the words lodged somewhere between my lungs and my lips. I don't understand," I finally whispered, though I already understood too well. My husband didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his shoulders stiff. I wanted him to fight for me, to explain, to say it wasn't what it looked like, but he didn't. Not then, not at all. And there it was. That single, unbearable truth. The two people I trusted most, the two people I loved, or thought I loved, had been keeping a secret from me. And worse, they had decided I should pretend it didn't exist. I sank into the nearest chair, my fingers clutching the edge so tightly my nails bit into my palms. The apartment around me, normally warm and familiar, suddenly felt alien. The ticking of the clock was deafening. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the streetlights outside, the way the wind rattled the old window frames. Everything ordinary had turned sinister, every sound a reminder that I had been living a lie. She stepped closer, her eyes wide, filled with what I can only call fear or guilt, though guilt never smells like perfume. "I never meant for this to happen," she said. "I didn't plan it. We." Her words stumbled over each other, desperate, fragile, trying to build a bridge over the chasm they'd created. I wanted to leave. I wanted to throw open the door and run, to escape the suffocating closeness, the unbearable intimacy of their shared betrayal. But I stayed. Because, somewhere deep down, I needed to understand. I needed to know how someone I trusted so completely could choose him over me, how she could choose him over decades of friendship. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to summon the calm I usually kept tucked behind my chest, the quiet reserve that had helped me navigate everything from office politics to family squabbles. But this was different. This was not a minor betrayal. This was not a fleeting mistake. This was life-altering, heart-shattering, soul-twisting. And yet, there was a strange, cruel curiosity that kept me rooted to the spot. I needed to hear it from them. I needed to hear the story straight from the mouths of the two people who had rewritten my life without asking for permission. Her voice broke the silence again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, simple words, insufficient. But somehow they landed, and they landed heavily, dragging me down into a swirl of emotions I hadn't known I could feel all at once. Shock, grief, anger, disbelief, confusion. I opened my eyes slowly. My husband finally looked at me then, his gaze heavy with something I couldn't name. Shame, regret, or was it just fear of losing control? "It's not what you think," he started, but the words rang hollow even to my own ears. I wanted him to tell me that it was a mistake, that it was temporary, that I would wake up and it would be gone. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't that simple. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless. Each drop seemed to echo the cracks forming in my heart, tiny fissures that promised they would widen into irreparable damage. And there I sat, listening to the sound of betrayal mix with the scent of wet pavement and perfume, realizing that life had changed forever. It was then that I made a decision that would shape the months to come. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry in the street. I wouldn't beg them to choose me back. I would watch. I would listen. I would learn. And when the time came, I would decide what justice meant for me. I took a deep breath, smelling the dampness of the rain mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from the mug I had left on the counter that morning. And I whispered, not to them, not to anyone, but to myself, I will survive this. I will understand this, and I will not let this destroy me. The room was silent after that, save for the rain and the quiet ticking of the clock. And somewhere, beneath the storm of emotions, I felt a tiny, stubborn flicker of something I hadn't expected. Clarity. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass, tracing the patterns of the tears that threatened to fall down my own cheeks. I thought about what had been lost, what had been hidden, and what I would do next. And I realized with a bitter, quiet certainty that this story, my story, was only beginning. Before that evening, life had a rhythm that felt safe. Ordinary, maybe, but comforting. My husband, David, and I had been married for 8 years. Our apartment was small, but it had warm corners where sunlight pooled through the living room windows in the morning. The smell of fresh coffee in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of vanilla-scented candles I liked to light after work, all of it created a sense of home. David had a quiet way about him. Not the loud, dramatic type, but the sort who noticed the little things. The way I liked my tea with a teaspoon of honey. The way I always ran my fingers over the edge of the windowsill when I was thinking. He was the person I leaned on after long, exhausting days at the office, the one I trusted with secrets too small and too large to tell anyone else. And for the most part, he was kind, attentive, predictable. Then there was Sarah, my best friend since college. We had met in that awkward, fumbling way of 20-year-olds trying to figure out life, bonding over late-night study sessions, shared meals, and secrets we couldn't tell anyone else. She was funny in a dry, sarcastic way that could make me laugh even when I didn't feel like it. She had always been fiercely loyal, or so I thought. Our friendship had been one of the constants in my life. We shared everything, or at least we used to. Her laugh, the way she tapped her fingers on tables when she was impatient, the soft scent of her perfume that clung to her like an invisible veil, these were comforting, familiar, safe. Our lives intertwined seamlessly. David and I hosted dinner parties with her. Sarah would drop by unannounced, bringing small gifts, little baked treats. Holidays were filled with laughter, shared memories, and the clinking of wine glasses. I never imagined that this closeness could harbor betrayal, that the people I trusted most could one day become the architects of my heartbreak. Our days were simple, filled with ordinary joys. I worked as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm, the office filled with the low hum of computers, phones ringing in distant cubicles, and the occasional burst of laughter from coworkers who had found some temporary delight in the monotony of their tasks. My job was satisfying enough. I liked seeing campaigns come together, emails scheduled, graphs filled with numbers that told stories of success. David worked as a graphic designer, often from home, sketching on his tablet, headphones perched over his ears, the faint smell of ink and paper surrounding him. We had routines, the kind that make life feel safe. Morning coffees together, walks on weekends through the park where the leaves rustled under our feet in early autumn, movie nights curled up on the sofa with blankets, the occasional Sunday brunch at our favorite cafe. Nothing flashy, nothing extraordinary, but ours. Sarah was a frequent part of these routines. She'd often call mid-morning, her voice warm and teasing. "Hey, are you alive or still buried in emails?" she asked. We laugh, sip our coffees, talk about work, family, and the little dramas that peppered our lives. She had her own apartment nearby, which made dropping by convenient. And I liked that. I liked feeling that closeness, that network of support, that sense of being seen. We even had rituals for tough days. When I had a rough week at work, Sarah would show up with takeout from that small Thai place we both loved, laughing at how terrible we were at cooking. We'd eat on the balcony, lights twinkling in the apartment buildings across the street, talking late into the night about our dreams, our failures, our fears. And David was often there too, joining in, sharing his own observations, giving us his quiet humor that somehow always lightened the mood. Life wasn't perfect, of course. We had arguments like any couple or friends do, minor disagreements about chores, finances, or forgotten plans. David had a stubborn streak, and I had my own need for control. Sarah could be reckless, impulsive, sometimes too bold for her own good. But these flaws never felt threatening. They were quirks, just human imperfections that we accepted and even teased each other about. I trusted them. I trusted him. I trusted her. And I believed deeply that our lives were built on honesty, transparency, and love. Our weekends were predictable, in the comforting sense of the word. Saturday mornings, David and I would walk to the local bakery, the aroma of fresh bread and pastries mingling with the crisp morning air. I would pick up a loaf of sourdough, he would grab a chocolate croissant, and Sarah would sometimes join us, her laughter ringing as she accidentally bumped into the doorframe or dropped her cup of coffee. Sunday evenings were for quiet reflection. I would read by the window, David sketching nearby, and Sarah sometimes sprawled on the sofa, scrolling endlessly through her phone but occasionally looking up to offer commentary on some trivial social media post. These moments, mundane as they were, had a rhythm, a safety, a sense of belonging. Even the small tensions were manageable. I remember one Saturday, Sarah had borrowed David's sketchbook without asking. I had noticed, of course, but I laughed it off when she returned it, covered in doodles. "You're ruining his masterpieces," I teased, and she had just grinned. These tiny incidents never hinted at the storm that was waiting to hit. They were innocent, small ripples in the calm waters of our friendship. It was during this time of normalcy, this comfort, this predictability, that the first seeds of doubt quietly took root. But at this stage, life felt normal, safe, intact, and I had no idea how fragile all of it really was. Evenings were my favorite part of the week. I loved the way the city lights reflected off the rain-slicked streets, the smell of dinner wafting through our apartment, the soft murmur of the television in the background while David worked on his sketches. And Sarah, she was often there too, her presence like a familiar song, one I could hum along to without thinking. We had routines, traditions, shared jokes. It was cozy, it was familiar, it was life, and it was perfect until it was. Looking back, I can see now the tiny, almost imperceptible cracks that had begun to form. A missed text here, a small lie there. But at the time, none of it registered as anything threatening. I was too busy living, too busy trusting, too busy believing that love and friendship were unshakable foundations. I made dinner that night just like any other. The sound of onions sizzling in olive oil, the clatter of pans, the aroma of garlic and herbs filling the kitchen. David had been quiet, his usual hum absent. I didn't think much of it at the time. Sometimes he worked in silence. And Sarah was supposed to meet us later, as usual, for our little weekend ritual. But that evening would change everything. When the door opened, and she walked in, not smiling at me, but at him, I had no idea that the life I thought I knew would be upended. The ordinary would become extraordinary in its cruelty, and the people I loved most would become the very source of my heartbreak. It started with small things, almost imperceptible at first, the kind of details that you notice only if you're paying close attention, and I wasn't, not really. I was too wrapped up in work, in the routines that had always comforted me, in the laughter-filled weekends with David and Sarah. But then there were the text messages. I hadn't meant to see them. I was just reaching for my phone, intending to check my calendar, when David's screen lit up across the room. The name flashing on the lock screen made my stomach drop. Sarah. I told myself it was innocent, of course it was. Friends text all the time. Plans, jokes, shared memories. That's normal. But my thumb hesitated before putting the phone down. There was a faint urgency in the little preview that I couldn't ignore. Words like, "can't wait to see you tonight," and "I need to talk to you about us." At first, I laughed nervously. Surely I was overreacting. My husband was thoughtful, considerate, even predictable. Sarah had always been dramatic at times, prone to exaggeration. That's all it was, exaggeration, nothing more. Then there were the dinners. They began to change subtly. When the three of us met, David and I would talk, laugh, exchange the usual banter. But I noticed the way Sarah would glance at him. Not the casual glance friends give, but something more, something lingering. And David, He didn't notice, or maybe he did, but it didn't seem to matter. My stomach would tighten, an uneasy knot forming at the pit of my abdomen, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things. The first real shift happened during one of our Saturday brunches. We were at our favorite cafe, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filling the air. Sarah reached across the table under the guise of grabbing a napkin, but her hand brushed David's in a way that made my heart stutter. He didn't pull away, not immediately. I felt my face flush. "Sarah," I said softly, trying to mask the tremor in my voice, "watch the hand." She pulled back quickly, laughing a little too hard. "Oh, sorry, didn't even realize." David looked between us, puzzled, then shrugged as if this were nothing worth mentioning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That small touch, innocent in any other context, now felt like a crack in the foundation of everything I trusted. Over the next few weeks, the incidents multiplied. Sarah started showing up unannounced more often, and always when I wasn't expecting her. I would come home from work, and there she was in the living room, chatting with David in that easy, familiar way that used to make me smile, now making my chest tighten. Their laughter would float through the apartment, light, airy, harmless on the surface. But beneath it, I sensed a rhythm, a secret cadence meant only for them. I began noticing subtle changes in David, too. His phone was always face down now, his screen always dim. He would step out to take calls, disappear into the bedroom for long stretches, and I started catching him glancing at messages with a tension in his shoulders I hadn't seen before. When I asked what was going on, he would brush it off, give some vague excuse about work or deadlines. And I, wanting to believe, accepted it. For a while. Then there were the little lies, the ones you don't see at first, the soft fabrications that unravel trust. He told me he had a late meeting. She said she was working on a project at home. But sometimes the timelines didn't add up. Sometimes a detail in their story would contradict something I knew to be true. And each time I noticed it, I felt a small shiver of unease, a whisper that something was off. I started paying more attention. Not obsessively, but cautiously, trying to reconcile my instincts with my love for them. I would watch how they moved around the apartment, the way their eyes met, the way their laughter carried through the rooms. And slowly, that whisper in my chest grew louder. The real turning point came one Friday evening. I had stayed late at the office, a pile of reports waiting for me on my desk. I was tired, drained, but looking forward to the quiet dinner with David. I opened the door to our apartment, and the first thing I noticed was the faint scent of Sarah's perfume, one she never wore when she visited me. I paused. Something felt wrong. The air was thick with a familiarity that wasn't mine. I stepped inside quietly, listening. Laughter, David's laugh, yes, but there was something else beneath it, something lighter, intimate, secret. A conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I crept closer to the living room. My heart pounded, ears straining. I couldn't make out all the words, just fragments. "Can't stop thinking about you. We'll figure it out. Promise me you won't tell her." The last part made my stomach drop, like a stone into icy water. I wanted to stop, to turn around and leave, to pretend I hadn't heard it, but my body betrayed me. My feet moved slowly, inching toward the voices. And then in the dim glow of the lamp, I saw them. David and Sarah sitting close together on the sofa, holding hands in a way that was intimate, almost tender. She looked at him with that same expression she had once reserved for me, the one that said she understood me completely, knew me completely. And he looked at her with a softness I hadn't seen in years. I felt my chest tighten. The room spun slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I wanted to shout, to run, to demand answers. But instead, I froze, caught between disbelief and the raw, creeping realization that my intuition had been right all along. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft tick of the clock, feeling the weight of what I had seen settle over me like a cold, damp blanket. The betrayal wasn't just a thought anymore. It wasn't an abstract possibility. It was real, and it was devastating. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound in the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant car horns, even the soft padding of David moving in the kitchen, made me flinch. My mind raced, replaying the moments, analyzing the words, the gestures, the laughter. I wanted clarity, but clarity hurt. I wanted truth, but truth was a blade slicing through everything I had trusted. I began to watch more closely. I became aware of the little exchanges, the shared glances, the hushed whispers. I noticed the texts he would delete immediately, the phone calls taken in the bedroom, the unexplained absences. Every detail seemed to confirm my fear. Yet I couldn't confront them. Not yet. There was a strange, paralyzing mix of love, loyalty, and disbelief holding me back. Part of me wanted to scream at Sarah, to rip her apart with words, to make her feel the agony she had inflicted. Part of me wanted to corner David, demand the truth, force him to choose. But I stayed silent. I watched. I waited. It was a slow-burning fire, this realization. The kind that doesn't explode immediately but smolders, filling every corner of your mind, seeping into dreams, coloring every interaction, every gesture, every word. And as the days passed, as the whispers grew louder and the glances more intimate, I knew the storm was coming. I just didn't yet know when or how. The truth, when it finally arrived, didn't knock politely. It crashed through the door and left nothing untouched. I remember the moment with unbearable clarity, the way the air felt heavier, the way my heart seemed to stop mid-beat. It was a Wednesday evening. I had stayed late at work again, trying to drown my unease in spreadsheets and emails, convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, I was imagining things. The rain had returned, drumming against the windows of my office with a steady insistence. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the sound reminded me of that night weeks ago, the first time I'd caught them, the first glimmer of betrayal. By the time I got home, it was nearly 9. The apartment was dark, save for the soft glow of the kitchen light. I noticed the faint scent of perfume almost immediately, Sarah's. My stomach twisted. I had told myself I wouldn't confront, that I would wait for evidence, but somehow, tonight, something in me demanded answers. I stepped inside quietly. The living room was empty. My pulse slowed slightly. Relief, not exactly. Suspicion, always hovering, didn't ease. Then I saw it, a small envelope lying on the coffee table. It wasn't mine. It was David's. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a note, folded carefully, in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting. My eyes scanned the words, each one feeling like a knife twisting in my chest. I know this is wrong. I know it's impossible. But I love him and I can't keep pretending anymore. Please don't tell her. Let me have him just this once. I promise I'll handle the rest. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the envelope. The sound of it hitting the table echoed in the silent apartment. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I stumbled toward the bedroom, desperate for some explanation, some rationalization, some way to make this not true. David was there, standing by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street. When he turned to face me, I saw it. The avoidance, the hesitation, the guilt that finally admitted what my heart already knew. David, what is this? My voice was barely a whisper. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly, as if gathering the courage to speak the truth he'd been hiding. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said finally, his voice low, strained. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I shouted, the words tearing out of me before I could stop them. You're supposed to love me, you're supposed to be my partner, and her, she's my best friend. He flinched like my words physically struck him. I know, he said. I know, I can't even begin to explain why. It just happened. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it to happen. But I can't undo it. The apartment spun around me. The walls seemed to close in. The familiar hum of the refrigerator became a mocking presence. Even the ticking of the clock sounded like a countdown to my unraveling. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, hot and insistent, and I wanted to run. I wanted to escape this suffocating reality. But then Sarah appeared. At the door. Silent, hesitant, eyes wide with something I can only describe as fear and shame mixed with longing. She stepped inside slowly. I know you'll hate me, she began, her voice trembling. But I couldn't stay away. I couldn't. I love him. I can't lie about it anymore. Please, please don't tell anyone. I need you to let this happen. Her words were poison wrapped in velvet. They cut through me, made me question everything I thought I knew. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the entire apartment into chaos. But instead, I found myself sitting down heavily on the sofa, my hands clutching my knees. "Why?" I whispered finally. "Why him? Why me? Why now?" She took a cautious step closer. "It's not like we planned it this way. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. I never wanted that. But he makes me feel things I can't control." David leaned against the doorway, silent. His silence was more damning than any words. He had already made his choice, and now it was laid bare before me. I could feel the rage building, sharp and bright, like fire in my veins. And yet, beneath it was a deeper, more insidious ache, betrayal. By the two people I trusted most, the people I thought I could depend on without question. I need time," I managed to say. My voice was hoarse. "I need to think." They both nodded, as if aware that the time for explanations had passed, that what had been done could not be undone. And they left me there, in the dim glow of the kitchen light, with the rain tapping against the windows like a relentless drumbeat reminding me of what had been lost. I remember packing the apartment for hours, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the soft patter of rain. I kept thinking about every laugh, every touch, every casual moment I had shared with them over the past months. Every one of them now seemed tainted, reframed in the harsh light of betrayal. I began to replay every detail, searching for signs I had missed, wondering how I could have been so blind. There were so many moments that now carried new meaning. The lingering touches, the whispered jokes, the way David's hand would brush hers a little too often. How could I have missed it? Or worse, had I seen it and ignored it because I didn't want to believe it? That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain trace rivulets down the glass. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. The smell of burnt toast from my abandoned dinner still lingered faintly in the air, and the distant hum of street traffic reminded me that the world outside had not stopped, that life moved on, even as mine felt shattered. By the next morning, I knew something had to change. I couldn't pretend, couldn't ignore the reality any longer. I had to confront them, to face the truth fully, and decide what I would do with the wreckage of my heart and my life. The discovery had done its work. It had stripped away the illusions, laid bare the duplicity, and forced me to see the world, and the people I loved, with unforgiving clarity. And yet, beneath the despair, a small spark of resolve flickered. I realized then, amidst the tears and the shock, that I had a choice. I could crumble, let the betrayal define me. Or I could act, carefully, deliberately, and with the dignity and strength I hadn't yet summoned. The betrayal was complete, the trust was broken, and my life as I had known it was over. After that night, I felt like I was living underwater. Every sound, every movement, every word felt muffled and distorted, as if the world itself had betrayed me along with the people I loved. And yet, even in that haze, I knew I couldn't remain passive. I had to act. Not impulsively, no screaming, no lashing out, but deliberately, strategically, and with the clarity I hadn't yet allowed myself to feel. The first thing I did was step back. I needed space. I moved into the guest bedroom, packing a small overnight bag, pretending it was for work travel. I left a note for David. "I need a few days to think. Please respect my space." No accusations, no anger, just a boundary. Because if I reacted too soon, too emotionally, it could spiral into chaos. I needed calm, control, observation. From that quiet corner of the apartment, I began to watch. Not in the creepy, paranoid sense, but with careful awareness. How they interacted when I wasn't there, what gestures lingered too long, what words were exchanged behind closed doors. And every time I glimpsed them together, I felt a mixture of disgust, heartbreak, and anger, but also an undeniable clarity. I had to protect myself, my dignity, and my life. I started documenting everything. Small details, dates, conversations, text messages. I didn't want to forget, and I didn't want their actions to be dismissed later as misunderstandings. It became a meticulous process, almost obsessive at times, but I needed the truth laid out plainly before I confronted them. The confrontation itself wasn't immediate. I spent days planning it. I considered all outcomes, weighed all possibilities. I imagined screaming at them both, but I knew that wouldn't serve me. I imagined leaving without a word, disappearing from their lives, but a part of me still craved closure, the understanding of why this had happened. When the time came, I invited Sarah over first. I told her I needed to talk, and she arrived nervously, eyes wide, hands fidgeting. I gestured for her to sit, and we faced each other, the apartment heavy with the tension that had been building for weeks. "I know everything," I said calmly, almost too calmly, letting the words hang in the air like a weight. "The texts, the hand-holding, the whispers, I know." Her face paled. I can explain." "No," I interrupted, voice steady. "There's nothing to explain that can make this okay. You knew it was wrong. You knew what you were doing to me. And yet, you asked me to keep it secret." Her lips trembled. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. I love him." Love, that word felt like a knife in my chest. "Love? You call this love?" I asked softly, my voice quivering just enough to betray the storm beneath. "This is betrayal. This is deception. This is tearing apart the people you claim to care about most." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And in that silence, I realized something critical. She had no plan for the aftermath. She hadn't considered the consequences, hadn't thought about what it would do to me. She only thought about herself. Next came David. He didn't need an invitation. I called him to the living room. His face was pale, eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I simply laid everything out in front of him. The texts, the late-night disappearances, the subtle glances, the envelope. He tried to speak, to justify, to explain, but I didn't let him. I just watched. I listened. Every word that tumbled from his mouth only confirmed what I already knew. He had chosen her. At that moment, I made another decision. I would not be passive. I would not be invisible. But my action wouldn't be revenge in the petty, vengeful sense. It would be strategic, measured, effective. I decided to take control of my narrative. First, I limited their access to my life. I changed passwords, secured personal files, and began to rebuild boundaries that had been eroded over months of deceit. I reached out to close friends and family, carefully explaining the situation in measured terms, not to gossip, but to create a support network and ensure that my side of the story was preserved. Then came the confrontation with them together. I invited them both to sit down calmly, and I asked them questions, hard, honest, piercing questions. Why did it happen? How could they do this to me? What did they expect from me? Their answers revealed a startling truth. They were blind to the damage they had done, so consumed with their own desires that the world outside their bubble didn't exist. Sarah confessed she had been struggling with feelings for David for years, feelings she thought she could suppress but ultimately couldn't. David admitted he had been conflicted, torn between loyalty and attraction, but had rationalized his actions as inevitable. I listened, I absorbed, I didn't forgive. Not yet, I didn't yell. Not yet. I simply understood the extent of their moral failings, the breadth of their betrayal. And with that understanding came a plan. The next steps would be about justice, dignity, and reclaiming my life. I documented everything, dates, times, conversations, evidence. I spoke with legal counsel discreetly, understanding my rights and options. I considered confronting Sarah publicly, making her accountable in our shared social circle, but I decided against it. I wanted justice, yes, but I wanted it on my terms, not in the heat of vindictive emotion. For weeks, I continued this measured approach. I maintained my composure in front of them, even as I burned inside with grief and anger. I reclaimed small pieces of control, scheduling my own time, enforcing boundaries, asserting myself in ways I hadn't before. Each act of self-preservation, no matter how small, felt like a tiny victory against the chaos they had created. And then, slowly, subtly, the power began to shift. Sarah's boldness faltered when she realized I wasn't going to crumble. David's attempts at casual intimacy were met with my polite, cold distance. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. They were unraveling because their actions had consequences, and I had finally set the rules. I began to feel something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks, clarity. Not happiness, not yet, but clarity. The betrayal was real. The pain was real. but so was my strength. I was no longer a passive observer of my own life. I was a participant, a force, a person reclaiming dignity in the aftermath of heartbreak. It was not easy. There were nights of tears, of trembling hands, of questions that refused to leave my mind. But with each day, I felt a small sense of empowerment. I had witnessed betrayal. I had processed it. And now I was taking deliberate steps to ensure that I would emerge intact, whole, and in control of the story that was mine to tell. The shift didn't happen overnight, but once I had made the decision to reclaim my life, the ripple effects were unavoidable. Sarah and David had both assumed that secrecy would shield them from judgment, that their private betrayal could remain hidden in the corners of our shared social circles. They were wrong. It began subtly. I reached out to friends, my family, my closest colleagues, in small, careful doses. I told my story factually, without embellishment, leaving emotions in check but not erased. I didn't seek sympathy. I didn't want pity. I wanted accountability, acknowledgement, and to ensure that the truth was known in circles where silence might have otherwise protected their deceit. Friends began to notice changes in David and Sarah as well. Invitations they once received routinely, dinners, gatherings, weekend trips, suddenly ceased. Their avoidance became more obvious. Their whispers in public settings became stiff, forced. And when they did appear together, there was an undeniable tension beneath the surface, a quiet guilt that no charm or laughter could mask. The first real confrontation outside our apartment came at a mutual friend's dinner party. I had chosen to attend, not to humiliate, but to show presence, calm, and composure. They had expected the world to continue as if nothing had happened. But the atmosphere shifted the moment I entered. Sarah's smile faltered. David's polite nod was strained. Mutual friends exchanged awkward glances, some whispering among themselves, others sidling up to me with quiet questions and soft expressions of support. The whispers were subtle at first, but persistent. Everyone knew something had shifted. I could feel it, the weight of truth settling, visible in the way people looked at them. I did not need to speak about the betrayal. The evidence was already there, their furtive glances, the stolen touches, the stories carefully relayed in confidence to those I trusted. The social consequences began to unfold quietly but inevitably. Invitations dwindled. People I had once seen as neutral now kept distance. Mutual acquaintances whispered softly about integrity, loyalty, and character, words that stung sharply in the air where David and Sarah had once felt safe. Workplaces, too, became a mirror of reality. Sarah and David, who had once enjoyed casual camaraderie and shared spaces, began to feel the subtle judgment of colleagues. Sarah's usually warm and confident demeanor became clipped. David's humor lost its ease. I watched quietly from the sidelines, my own life intact, my own dignity preserved. I did not gloat. I simply observed, knowing that actions have consequences, that choices, no matter how secret, eventually surface. The public consequences were not violent or dramatic, but they were effective. Social isolation is a weight heavier than many anticipate, and both Sarah and David began to feel it keenly. Invitations dried up. Friends who once shared confidences no longer reached out. Their mutual networks, the people they thought would never notice, now subtly acknowledged their betrayal. And yet, what struck me most was the moral reckoning. Sarah approached me one evening, visibly shaken, eyes wide with the realization that her charm and manipulation no longer shielded her. I didn't think it would feel like this, she said, voice breaking. Everyone they know. Yes, I said quietly, meeting her gaze. Everyone knows now, and you'll have to live with what you've done, not just with me, but with yourself. David, too, was confronted in quiet moments of reflection. I didn't need to berate him. He faced a moral reckoning every time he looked in the mirror, every time he reached for a friendship or social connection that was no longer freely given. I had set the rules, and the consequences followed naturally. It was not revenge in the malicious sense, but in the measured, undeniable sense that actions bear consequences. I felt no joy in their discomfort, only a profound sense of justice and moral equilibrium. Even the community began to sense the fallout. Mutual acquaintances, friends, and distant family members began questioning loyalties, reconsidering alliances. The small world we had all inhabited had shifted. The narrative was mine to hold, and they were forced to navigate the fallout they had created. Through it all, I maintained my dignity. I did not humiliate them publicly. I did not spread gossip. I simply allowed truth and moral accountability to speak for themselves. In doing so, I found something I had feared I'd lost: my power, my agency, my self-respect. I also learned the unexpected effect of silence and composure. While David and Sarah floundered, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, I moved forward with my life. I nurtured relationships that were authentic, built on honesty rather than deception. I found quiet joys in work, friendships, and the simple rhythms of daily life. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to notice the freedom that comes with letting go of betrayal without letting it define you. I realized that public consequence is not about revenge. It is about truth, integrity, and living in a way that honors yourself while allowing the universe to balance itself. It was in this space that I truly began to see the difference between justice and cruelty. Justice is measured, patient, inevitable. Cruelty is impulsive, fueled by anger, and often leaves the perpetrator as hollow as the victim. I chose justice, and in that choice, I found a peace I hadn't imagined possible in the aftermath of heartbreak. The public consequences were complete in their subtlety. Sarah and David were forced to face social isolation, judgment, and moral accountability without me having to raise my voice. I was free to reclaim my life, to rebuild trust in myself, and to rediscover the world through the lens of my own resilience. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the stirrings of hope. Healing doesn't come all at once. It isn't a single moment or a single decision. It's a slow, deliberate process, like water eroding stone, reshaping landscapes over time. For weeks after the confrontation, I found myself moving cautiously through life, feeling every small tremor, every pulse of lingering heartbreak, yet noticing glimmers of possibility, too. The first step was reclaiming my space, physically, emotionally, mentally. I took back the apartment in ways that were both subtle and profound. I rearranged furniture, cleaned closets, and filled the rooms with items that felt distinctly mine. Photographs of friends and family who had been constants in my life, books that I loved, objects that carried no memory of betrayal. Every small act was a reminder that this was my life, and I would inhabit it fully, without shadows from the past looming over me. I also returned to routines that nourished me: morning coffee on the balcony, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, the quiet hum of jazz records on Sunday afternoons. These were small, sensory anchors in a world that had previously felt off balance, reminders that life could still be gentle, even after stormy nights of grief and betrayal. Therapy became an important tool. At first, I resisted, thinking that I should be able to navigate this on my own. But when I finally allowed myself to speak openly about the pain, the heartbreak, and the anger, I realized how heavy the burden had been. Putting words to the betrayal, numbing the emotions I had been suppressing, and confronting my own complicity in ignoring the early signs, all of this helped me untangle the knots inside me. I also found solace in writing. I began journaling every morning, not just recounting events, but exploring feelings, dissecting moments, understanding myself. I wrote letters I never sent to David and Sarah, letters that poured out grief, rage, and disappointment, but also recognition that I was the one responsible for my own healing. The act of writing, of witnessing my own truth, became a daily ritual that grounded me. Friends and family became my lifelines. They listened without judgment, offered comfort without intrusion, and provided laughter when my heart felt heavy. Slowly, I realized that betrayal had isolated me in ways I hadn't seen. I had pulled inward, hiding pain, allowing shame and confusion to take residence in my life. Reconnecting with loved ones reminded me that trust and loyalty still existed outside the walls of deception. One afternoon, I took a long walk through the park near my apartment. The sun filtered through golden leaves, and children's laughter filled the air. I noticed the rhythm of my own steps, the beating of my heart, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not complete, not perfect, but a sense that I could breathe again, that I could exist without the shadow of betrayal darkening every corner. I also learned forgiveness, not for their sake, not to erase the pain, but for mine. I understood that holding on to resentment, to anger, to the desire for retribution would only prolong my suffering. Forgiveness became a quiet, internal choice, to let go, to reclaim energy, to allow myself to move forward. As time passed, I began to notice the subtle changes in myself. I was more assertive, more confident in setting boundaries. I spoke my mind without fear of judgment, and I navigated relationships with more clarity and self-respect. I had learned, painfully, what was non-negotiable in my life, and I no longer allowed the actions of others to dictate my sense of worth or happiness. The experience also reshaped my understanding of love. I realized that love without respect, loyalty, and honesty is hollow. That attraction alone cannot sustain a relationship. That self-respect is the foundation upon which all meaningful connections must be built. And perhaps most importantly, I recognized that true love, whether for a partner, a friend, or oneself, cannot coexist with deception and betrayal. In quiet moments, I reflected on Sarah and David. I didn't seek to humiliate them or relive anger. Instead, I allowed their absence from my life to signify their consequences. Their choices had led them to isolation and moral reckoning. And in witnessing that, I found closure, knowing that justice, in its quiet, inevitable way, had been served. I began to explore new experiences, new friendships, new hobbies, new rhythms of life. I took a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try. I reconnected with colleagues I had lost touch with. I traveled briefly, immersing myself in the world outside the apartment that had once felt like a cage. Each step was tentative, yet affirming. Each experience reminded me that life could hold joy again, even after heartbreak. There were days when grief returned, like a shadow crossing the sun. A song, a scent, a passing glance at an empty chair would trigger memories of what had been lost. But I no longer allowed these moments to define me. I acknowledged the pain, let it wash over me, and then returned to the rhythm of living, stronger, more resilient, and grounded in the knowledge that I had survived the storm. Eventually, I came to understand that healing is not linear. It ebbs and flows, rises and falls. But what matters is the commitment to oneself, to reclaim agency, dignity, and joy, even when the past threatens to pull you back into despair. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I felt myself ready to love again. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with awareness, with boundaries, and with a profound respect for my own worth. I knew the past would always be a part of me, etched into my heart like a scar. But scars, I realized, do not weaken. They remind us of survival, of endurance, of the strength to continue. And in that strength, I found hope, peace, and the quiet promise of a life rebuilt. As I sit here now, looking out the window at the soft glow of evening, I think about how fragile trust can be, and how strong we are when it is broken. Betrayal, as painful as it is, teaches lessons that no gentle advice ever could. It forces us to confront our own boundaries, to question what we truly value, and to recognize the strength we didn't know we had. I often wonder how people survive the acts of those they love most. And then I remember, we survive because we have no choice but to. We survive because within us is a resilience, quiet but unshakable. It's the kind of strength that grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a tree pushing roots deep into the soil, weathering storms we never imagined we could withstand. If there's one thing I've learned through this heartbreak, it's that dignity and self-respect are more powerful than anger or revenge. Holding on to bitterness only weighs you down. Letting go, even when it feels impossible, gives you freedom. Forgiveness is not for them. It is for you. It's the light that allows you to move forward, to breathe again, to find joy in the little things without guilt or hesitation. I've also learned that the truth, when handled with patience and calm, carries its own consequences. The world has a way of balancing itself, and those who betray will often face the fallout in ways we cannot control, but we can control ourselves. We can maintain our integrity, our composure, our sense of right and wrong. And in doing so, we reclaim a part of life that no betrayal can take away, our inner peace. To anyone watching this story, feeling the sting of betrayal or grappling with heartbreak, know that your pain is valid, your feelings are real, and your journey is yours alone. It may feel impossible at first to imagine a life beyond the hurt, but I promise you it exists. It waits in quiet moments, in small victories, in the rebuilding of trust in yourself. Sometimes healing is as simple as reclaiming your morning coffee, breathing deeply in the silence, letting your own heartbeat remind you that you are alive, you are present, and you are capable of moving forward. And sometimes healing comes in bold steps, setting boundaries, confronting the truth, standing firm even when those around you falter. I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend that the road to recovery is easy or linear. But I can tell you this, we are stronger than we often give ourselves credit for. We can endure betrayal, heartbreak, and deception, and emerge with clarity, dignity, and hope. And so I leave this story not as a tale of ruin, but as a testament. Even when people you love betray you, even when life feels unbearably heavy, it is possible to rise again. It is possible to heal. It is possible to find peace, joy, and even love once more, first in yourself, and later, when the time is right, in the world around you. Would you have handled it the way I did? Would you have found the strength to act, to reclaim your life, to let go without losing your dignity? I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences, your reflections, and your stories in the comments below. If my story has resonated with you, or if you felt the quiet strength of survival through betrayal, please consider subscribing for more real emotional stories that explore the complexities of family, love, and resilience. Remember, betrayal is painful, but it is not the end. It is merely a chapter, a difficult, heartbreaking chapter, but one that can lead to a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate version of yourself. And that, my dear friends, is a story worth living.